From the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you are with us tonight. We are talking politics and we're talking history. So the January 6th committee, they will hold what is maybe their last hearing, maybe not, this week. It will be in prime time, and it's supposed to get the highest ratings so far. We thought it'd be interesting to look back on past congressional hearings, kind of a walk down memory lane. What do you remember? Watergate, Iran-Contra, whatever it may be. What do you remember about that? What are your thoughts? What kind of stands out to you? And just in case tons of you don't call in with that, and I hope you do, we have a guest, which is really great news. Dr. Marc Schwerdt. I'm so sorry. Dr. Marc Schwerdt with Lipscomb, Associate Professor, Chair of History, Politics, and Philosophy at Lipscomb. Thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
All right, so first of all, your thoughts on this hearing, January 6th. What are your initial thoughts on how it's going, its impact, all of that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are paying attention. You've got a lot of buzz, of course, it's being reported within the media. Is it actually making a difference to the people who are watching? I think it's doing sort of what we're seeing with most information that we get today. We're putting it through that partisan lens. So it's reinforcing those who think that something really needs to be done over here, who are supporting the hearings. They're saying, yes, 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 this is, telling me what I thought I knew. This is telling me what I believe, and now we're getting it out into the open. And then you've got those over here who are saying this is an illegitimate effort, or at the very least, this is something that is so stacked because it's only made up of Democrats and rhinos, Republicans in name only, that it's really not about getting to the truth. It's about getting to a partisan verdict. And so in that sense, I think it's kind of not really making a difference, but it's cementing what's already in place. So it's not moving the needle, as one of those new catchphrases that everybody's using.
It's kind of reinforcing what people already feel, like everything that seems to happen now. And so with our focus on past hearings and history, I remember we were saying before we came on, and maybe it dates who we are, but I did watch the Iran-Contra hearings. I was in college, high school, college, and sure, I guess that makes me a nerd, whatever. But I was watching. It was in the summer. It was high drama. Oliver North, Fawn Hall. Remember Fawn Hall?
Oh, yeah.
She became a celebrity after that. Oliver North's secretary.
Oliver North got an entirely new career after that.
So, it was amazing stuff, and you had high-level people testifying and all of that. Obviously, there are tons of other, Watergate, Benghazi. But so your assessment of these hearings, January 6th, would that same assessment apply potentially to all past hearings, or is it more about this era?
I think it's more about this era. It's not so much that this is a select committee. Okay, so that's a particular type of committee within Congress. Within Congress, you have the standing committees, the ones that we're all more familiar with, like armed forces, the budget committee, the appropriations committee, all of those. Select committees are not legislative committees. They are investigative committees. Okay, now some of them are permanent in the way that they're done. The Select Committee on Intelligence. Okay, so they're a committee that actually oversees and investigates particular things about the intelligence community. Then we have particular ones. So we not only have something like this January 6th committee, but we also have Iran-Contra, like you said, but also 9/11 was a bipartisan commission, so it's not quite the same thing. But they have a very long history. We have some going back to Teapot Dome, which was a huge political scandal in the 1920s. You have the McCarthy hearings, which of course are notorious in the late 1940s and 1950s. We have Watergate, of course, which is probably the most well-known of these, Iran-Contra, like you've already said, and then the ones that are a little bit more recent. So these serve a purpose. For the most part, what they do is investigate one thing. This is where it's quasi judicial. It's not quite a judicial type process. And that's what this committee is there to do, is investigate this one particular incident and sort of bring out into the open, as opposed to a judicial hearing, which would be more about finding a situation of, okay, declaring guilt and things like this. This is a little bit more like a grand jury kind of situation, if you're going to make an analogy.
And it's really a fact-finding, I feel like. I mean, what they're really trying to do is just get all this information out there and present it to the public. And is that...
Yeah, they are. It's kind of handicapped from the very beginning, simply because it only does have, because the Republicans didn't want to go along with it. So this really is a Democrat-heavy affair. And the Republican Party actually censured the two Republicans who were actually participating in it enthusiastically, with Representative Cheney and Representative Kinzinger.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. The Republicans were censured. And I'm sure Democrats would say, well, they were invited to be on it. They just didn't want to be on it, you know, and it's this whole thing.
The Republicans put forth some names, and the Democrats didn't like those names, and they rejected them. And so the Republicans said, well, if you're not going to take the people we want to put on there, then we're not going to play ball. And this is on top of course, the torpedoing that the Republicans did of the bipartisan commission that was the original intent, that kind of 9/11 type bipartisan commission.
What do you think in the history of our country has been the most significant hearing of this sort? You know, congressional hearing, whether it be fact-finding, whatever it is.
Well, I mean, Watergate has to be at the top of that list simply because it brought down a president. After that, you know, McCarthy is probably the most notorious. Iran-Contra is in our memories. I'm not sure how much it's in the memories of like the young people that I teach today, or even millennials. So anybody under the age of like 40, I'm not really sure how much impact that really has on them. But that was a major scandal within Washington and within the United States at the time. And I don't think that was as partisan a exercise as this one is perceived to be, or is, which of course determines much of its actual impact.
Have any of them been as partisan as this is? I mean, if you think about it, Watergate, Republicans were certainly participating. Iran-Contra, they were certainly participating, both parties, Republicans and Democrats. And so is this just, again, the new world we live in, that it's this partisan?
It is certainly more partisan than Watergate. I mean, you know, the major stars to come out of that, you know, one of them was Fred Thompson. You know, one of our own Tennessee sort of legends becomes a Republican senator because that was more of institutional. That was Congress versus the president more so than it was Republican versus Democrat. Iran-Contra, you know, that really didn't have that again was more institutional. You know, we're trying to rein in the executive branch and not let it make foreign policy on its own without consulting Congress, especially as it was breaking laws. You know, you had the actual, you know, to get back to it, not to delve down too much into the details, but taking the money from the sale of missiles to Iran in 1986 and redirecting it to American-supported Contras down in Nicaragua was violating American law. It was going in because Congress was not going to pass a bill that was going to support that. So that, again, I think was more institutional than it was partisan conflict. We have a much more polarized electorate right now, and Congress has been this way for over a decade, where it's very difficult on big issues for one side to get along with the other. Now, I think on the lower part, sort of underneath the surface, there's more bipartisanship than probably Congress is given credit for. But when it comes to the headlines, when it comes to the leadership and all that kind of thing, R and D just go head to head like that.
I might want to hear more about the partisanship that's below the
Okay.
surface. That might give me hope, and I think that's something maybe we need to focus on. When it comes to that Iran-Contra, the chairman at the time said, "I believe these hearings will be remembered longest, not for the facts they elicited, but for the extraordinary and extraordinarily frightening views of government they exposed." And that's kind of what I remember. I kind of remember that it was this behind-the-scenes look at how government worked, and the president at the time, Reagan was saying he didn't know all this happened, and it seemed maybe he didn't, and it seemed like all this stuff was going on behind the scenes, and these high-level people were testifying about, this meeting and that meeting. It was quite fascinating.
Yeah.
And so that's different.
Yeah, I think it is. The biggest part that seemed to really emerge from Iran-Contra is that you had this lieutenant colonel, Oliver North, who was basically able to run his own foreign policy. I mean, he had people above him who were, of course, knowledgeable about what he was doing. The president had basically given sort of, I think, a vague sort of say, I want something done, but hadn't really given any directives. So he's kind of like, he had the ability to say he didn't know. But that kind of, again, it's institutional. It was about an executive branch that was going on its own and was ignoring Congress, and Congress was trying to assert itself. Congress has, and that's one of the purposes of a select committee, is to oversee what the executive branch is doing, what the bureaucracy is doing.
And you said there is this partisan kind of, they work together behind the scenes. I wonder.
Yeah, the bipartisan, yeah.
Yeah. Do you think the future we will have, and maybe it would be something so terrible that would bring both parties together, I don't know. Will we see Iran-Contra again, or Watergate again, where both parties are working together, or is it going to forever be what we see now?
Well, there's nothing that's forever, right? I think that it's going to take a while to work this out of our system. This didn't just happen with a Trump presidency. This didn't just happen with individuals who are sort of the face of this partisanship. This goes back quite a ways. If you talk to congressional scholars, they'll say that partisanship was really injected into especially things like congressional investigations. They would probably say, well, we'll point the finger at someone like a Newt Gingrich back in 1994, 1995. So we're talking about 25 years. Then some will point the finger at Mitch McConnell, who's been the Senate Majority Leader, who has, the head of the Republicans for so long. And then you have that this partisanship, again, has been very prominent within the halls of power, but it hasn't always been the defining characteristic. And the people, the voters, haven't always been as polarized as they are now. So a lot of this polarization, sometimes it's within the broader public, sometimes it's within the halls of power. And sometimes those things don't match up. Right now, they're matching up. It's pervasive, is how I would put it. And I think both parties are kind of struggling with who they're going to be in the future. They're not, the Democrats aren't really that coalition that was put together by FDR, that was continued through the Johnson administration in the 60s and moving forward. It has some echoes of that, but it's not the same party. Then you look at the Republican Party, they're not really about Reagan. They're not really about, those kinds of figures. So both of them are trying to sort of figure out how they want to do things. And until those parties kind of sort themselves out, I think the polarization is more likely to continue, simply because that's the easiest way to mobilize the voters to come vote for their respective parties.
That's fascinating, and that's a good point. I think both parties are kind of grappling with who are they, and they have changed. And so then, the age-old question comes: could there be a third party? What do you think?
I mean, if we didn't have the political system that we do, certainly. The biggest obstacle is that we have a winner-take-all system. We have this system where the person who gets the most votes gets the win. Okay, you don't, except for the Electoral College, you don't have to have a majority in order to win a seat in Congress or a Senate seat. So what that means is a third party comes along and they may be somewhat impactful. And the Reform Party is probably the easiest example of that. 1992, 1996, significant gains by Ross Perot and those who wanted to vote for him. But he got nowhere close because he never got any electoral votes. Then you look at what's happening with any congressional seat or any Senate election, and it's very difficult to break the hold of those two parties, not simply because they have the advantages like incumbency, which are very important, but no matter how popular you are, it's really difficult to get on the ballot. It's really difficult to beat both of those parties when both of them already have about 1/3 of the population already built in. And then it's you and those two other and the two sitting parties that are kind of trying to go after that other 1/3. So if you're really successful as a third party candidate in a congressional seat, you might get 20%, which still leaves you in third place.
Right. And so, yeah, you've always heard, or I've always heard, that third party, it's really tough. And that's exactly what you're saying. Third party, it's really tough. But I'm really interested in what you said about the Democrat-Republican Party are really grappling with who they are. And it's fascinating, where will they land? How will each party land?
Well, they're being pulled in a couple of different directions. We have a country whose culture, whose makeup, whose economy is quite different than where it was 25 years ago. Our position in the world is different than it was 10 years ago. So you put all those things together and people don't know what they want to be. There's a lot of different visions out there for it. And what we haven't had is someone come through, or more than one person come through, with a compelling way of bringing all that together into maybe a couple of visions that both reflect who we are and also where we want to go. And that's, you look at our debates right now, so many of them are very fundamental, they're cultural, as opposed to simply about the economics of something. I'm not dismissing things like gas prices or anything like that, for sure, because I think that's going to be the bigger parts of what we're talking about in November. But these particular hearings really are more geared towards who we want to be type questions, as opposed to what's in it for me type questions.
Very interesting. All right, we have to take a break, but that kind of sets the table for our discussion. So call in with any comments on any of that, but we're talking specifically about past hearings, about past congressional hearings. What do you remember? Is there one that stands out to you in history? And of course, January 6th. What are your thoughts on that? So we will take a break. We'll come back, continue our discussion right after this.